So I was watching the Kentucky Derby the other day, and it reminded me, I got a license plate on one of my cars because we took this to a Glidden tour back in 1992 to the Bluegrass State. So that reminded me, I think I should do one on this car today. Let's check this out.
Hey, hello. Welcome back to Klepp's Garage. I'm your host, Bruce, and today we're looking at my 1923 Lincoln 7-passenger touring car. Fine automobile. This was the first year for the Ford production of Lincoln, and we'll go in depth on that a little bit later. But anyhow, today we're going to look at one of my favorite cars, and if you've watched the channel before, you know when I say my favorite car, it's because I'm driving this one today, so it's my favorite. But this one here really is one of my favorites. So we're going to check out the 23 Lincoln. All right, so we're going to talk about the 23 Lincoln, 1923, not a new one, an old one. And I bet you're thinking, well, Ford always made this car, that's no big deal. Well, no, there's a lot more to this story. Ford did not build this car. They did not engineer or design this car. In fact, all they did was take over a company that went into bankruptcy and stole all the ideas and put their production line manufacturing in and kept the Lincoln under a separate name, and that's kind of a whole other story. But let's back up. Let's go back up to 1902. This is when the Detroit Motor Company was founded and was building a one-cylinder automobile that wasn't working very good. Their head engineer at that time was the Henry Ford, same Henry Ford Motor Company. So Henry was having issues. So the stockholders brought in an engineer of better quality. This engineer's name was Henry Martin Leland. Leland come in and changed the design of the one-cylinder engine to make it run better. And of course, Henry didn't like that, and the stockholders got rid of Henry. So he was pretty upset at 1902. Remember this. So they took Henry Leland's design for the one-cylinder engine and made the first Cadillac. Henry Leland decided to name the company after the French explorer Cadillac, and that's where the name Cadillac come from, not after Henry Leland, but Henry Leland come up with that. So he took that company and come up with the Cadillac Motor Company and worked there for years. Around 1912, they got into an agreement with a gentleman out of Dayton, Ohio, near my hometown, by the name of Charles Kettering. Charles Kettering developed the first self-starter, or the electric starter. This is key to this Lincoln because in 1912, Cadillac adopted the Kettering starter. And you're going to see here in a minute what this has. So anyhow, that was 1912. Up to 1916, Leland was still there designing and building Cadillacs, and the war broke out, World War I. When the war broke out, Leland decided to start building Liberty airplane engines, and that actually was a very good engine. Of course, at the time, Durant, who was the head of General Motors, didn't want nothing to do with the war effort, and Henry Leland thought that was appalling, but he went ahead and built the motors. Cadillac put in the Liberty engines in the airplanes, and I'm not sure what the name of the airplane was back then. You'll have to look that up. Anyhow, war was over. Henry Leland was flush with a lot of money from all this work with the government and selling them airplane engines. Henry Leland took off and started his own company, the Leland Lincoln Company. Lincoln being named after the sitting president of one of Henry Leland's favorite presidents, Abraham Lincoln. That's where the name come from. So in about 1920, Henry Leland come out with the Leland Lincoln Motor Company. And he built this car up to 1922, and in 22, his production couldn't keep up with his costs, and the stockholders come in again and said, hey, we can't have this. So they basically sold out the company to Henry Ford after it went into bankruptcy. Henry Ford come in, bought the company, knowing that Henry Leland was in charge of it, and kicked Henry Leland out of the company to get back at him for what happened in 1902. So that was a long way to get there, but that's the gist of it, what happened. You can read up on this. There's really a lot that went on in those years. But that's how Ford come up with Lincoln. They acquired it in 1922. By 1923, this was the first year Lincoln was owned by Ford, and they put their name on the badge. So from here on out, now Ford makes Lincolns. Now I want to show you what's on this car. It's just weird because back then there was a lot of things going on. So I talked about the starter. We're going to look at the starter. All right, so actually I'm going to start over here on this side of the engine. This is a massive 90-degree V8 with an aluminum block, cast iron jugs with removable cast iron heads. So here is the distributor, and a neat thing about the distributor, and we're going to go over to the starter side, but the distributor was made by Delco. Yes, the Dayton, Ohio-based Delco Engineering Laboratories Company. That's what Delco actually stands for. So there is the tag. Let's go back over here and look at the generator. This has what's known as a starter generator. And gee, gosh, made by Delco, same people. So remember, that was with Charles Kettering, who had come out with the Delco ignition and starter for the 1912 Cadillac. So Leland, of course, knew him. When he started his own Lincoln company, he just went ahead and used that. So Ford didn't switch over to their stuff until later on, after they took over. But Delco was on Ford products for a while. I always find that interesting. So this is the other side of the V8. What you're looking at down there is the water pump, and then it's driven off the timing chain. So this is a coupling or universal joint that runs off the timing chain. That's an adjuster. This actually adjusts the timing chain, and the way you check that is you take off this plug here in the front, and you put your finger in there basically and see how much slot the chain has, and then you set the tension with this. So quite an interesting piece, and we'll go a little bit more in depth on it.
Okay, so this is the first full year that the Ford Motor Company took over the Leland Lincoln Company and built the Ford Lincoln. So let's back out here and I'll show you something else while we're on the front of this car. The headlights were made, hope you can see this, made by Bauschem and Lomb. Yes, the eyeglass people. And if you notice, they have a purple tint to them. You know, today's cars have the blue tint. Well, they knew about tinting back then in the 20s. So again, nothing new. The old cars have about everything the new cars have. They just have fancy electronic crap. Always thought that was kind of neat that they had the purple tint. And when you turn them on, they show up white. Let's do that. Well, here's what they look like when they're on. They're not real bright, but they're bright enough to see by. But I'm sure that blue tint or purple tint has something to do with making them brighter than they actually are. So this is called a 7-passenger touring car. It's got 2 seats and a set of jump seats we'll show you here in a minute. Then you lay the top down, and it's an actual touring car. If this was a hard top, it would actually be a limousine. Wheelbase on this is, I guess I should have looked this up before we started this. All right, so I was talking wheelbase, and I couldn't remember. I've got too many cars to remember wheelbases and horsepowers and numbers. I could look them up, but I guess I should start doing that. Anyhow, got the measuring tape out. So center to center wheelbase, this one here looks like it's about 136 and a half or 137, somewhere around there. So that is 11-foot, 4-inch wheelbase. The overall length of the car, if I remember right, guess I could just find out why I'm here, huh? I think it's 18. Let's find out. Yep, 18 foot, bumper to bumper. So this is by no means a small car. Yeah, it's like right at 18 foot. This is actually a big car. Body is all aluminum. This has an all aluminum body, hood steel, fenders are steel, cast aluminum engine block, and cast aluminum transmission. However, this car still weighs in at about 4,700 pounds. We weighed it once. So it's still a very big car. So we'll get into the back. So here I am in my Boco Lounger here, leather couch. It's in the back seat. As you can tell, there's plenty of leg room. This is another social distance car, unless you invite more than 4 people along. So you got a driver and a passenger, shotgun rider. Shotgun! That's where this come from, because we'd stand on running boards with shotguns back in the day. 1924, the Chicago Police Department ordered these brand new for police cars because of their speed and power. And if you go on the internet, look up Lincoln touring car. There's a picture of one of these back in the day from Chicago. We'll put it on here. And it's going around a corner just leaning. The guys got the guns, and unbelievable. So anyhow, let's say you're going to take more than 4 people. So come back here and we'll show you how this works. So you get your passengers back here. Here's your glove boxes, so you can put your gloves and other paraphernalia in there. Has a courtesy light. When you open the passenger door, this light comes on. So hidden in here are 2 what's known as jump seats. And so this gives you 2 more passengers. And now it becomes a 7-passenger touring. Still plenty of room back here. Then they got room up there, and then there's plenty of room up there. So you can take all your friends and go on a tour. And this is a great car to take a ride in, especially in the summertime, top down or top up. So we'll talk a little bit about the driving controls and dash and stuff that's up here. This is kind of neat. So this car came with its own toolbox. Why it's in the door, I have no idea. One key fits all. This key fits the toolbox, fits ignition. There's a lockable unit underneath the seat, and the spare tires are lockable. So one key fits it all. Oh, and there's a locking mechanism down here for the gear shift. You can actually lock the gear shift in neutral or in one gear. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but anyhow. So yeah, it has a little toolbox here. Actually, you need some of these to take the top off, because the top has a locking nut and a bolt. So I guess that's the reason why this is here. I don't really know other than that. So there's your little toolkit. It does have an air compressor built into the transmission. The way you turn it on, you stick a screwdriver in here and flip that with the car in neutral with the motor running. There's a hose connection under the front seat. You wire your hose to that, or screw your hose onto that, and you can go out and pump up your tires if you have a flat tire. Now let's say you're a lot bigger than I am. I'm not too skinny, but I'm not too fat. Let's say you can't get in this car because this wheel takes up a lot of room. So this has what's known as a fat man steering wheel. So this comes down like this. So it makes it easier to get in. And once you get in here, just pull that up. Fat man steering wheel. Today they'd call that a tilt wheel. Well, not really, because you can't really drive it. Well, you could drive it like this, I suppose. I don't know why you'd want to. But that is the fat man steering wheel. So this is ignition, and that basically locks this here. So this is how you would start it. Just turn that on. And there's dash light comes on here, lights up your gauges. You have an oil pressure gauge, an amp gauge, speedometer cluster, you got a speedometer, mileage, trip mileage, and then I think this is a 7-day clock. And it has a little thing that tells you if it's daytime or nighttime. That's kind of neat. This is your trip reset. This is your air conditioning knob. You didn't know it had air conditioning, did you? See that little louvered thing out there? That just cranks that up and down. So that is that is your cowl vent, and that sends the air down here on your feet and brings all the heat off the engine out and away from you. So that's what that's for. Choke. And then your controls up here. This is a Spark Advance. And then your, I guess you'd call it a cruise control or a throttle control. This actually controls the throttle, but there is a foot feed also. So if you're going down the road, you want to just keep it at one speed, you do that number. And then the cigar lighter. The cigar lighter goes clear to the back seat. It has a cord there that goes out. No, I'll get it back in there. Anyhow, that goes clear to the back seat. And also, there is a plug. Yeah, over here. There's a plug underneath the dash that you can plug an auxiliary port. It's actually for a little spotlight to see to pump up your tire at nighttime, I guess, but that plugs in here. And that was all standard equipment, came with the car. It also has a tilt out windshield to get some air in here. And of course the horn. Sounds sick. We'll get it running, it sounds better. So that's pretty much for the front. Standard clutch, brake, 3-speed, emergency brake. There you go. All right, so I'm going to try this again. This is actually the 4th time I've tried to shoot this scene. This is like 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. I've actually now have a sinusitis. I'm taking good drugs, steroids for that. Oh, I like steroids. Anyhow, I'm going to try to explain this engine one more time. So, Henry Leland, Ford Cadillac, built a 1-cylinder engine, stayed there up until 1917 for World War I. Let's back up to 1912. Henry Leland was the head engineer, and there was a designer that worked there, and I can't find his name. I believe he was Italian, don't hold me to that. Anyhow, they come up with the V8. Cadillac come out with a V8 in 1912, which is going to be the forerunner of the next engine Henry Leland built, and then this engine. So let's skip ahead. So the V8 come out in Cadillac 1912. The war broke out, World War I in 1917. Our government wanted aircraft engines and contacted Packard and Ford and all the big companies and wanted to see if they could design a lightweight, high-powered aircraft engine. Now this is where it gets sketchy. There's all kinds of different things on the internet you can read. It says Packard come up with it, Ford had something to do with it, Leland come up with it. From what I can tell, Leland come up with the Liberty engine, the V12, but it sounds like his design team is what come up with it, not Henry himself. Anyhow, they did come up with the Liberty V12 60-degree engine and built that for World War I. Henry Leland quit Cadillac because Billy Durant didn't like wars and didn't want anything to have GM to do with a war. So Leland broke off, started the Lincoln Motor Company, and built the V12 60-degree airplane engine. Now, if you look online, some of them will say 90 degrees, which is fourth part of the circle. Some say 45 degrees. No. I've measured this in with an angle piece, and it's a 60-degree motor. So I have my little angle finder. I put it down the V and just draw it here on this. So this is one side of the V. You flip it over. There's the other side of the V. 60 degrees. That's what this engine is. So after the war was folding down, Henry Leland in 1920 come out with his version of the V8 60-degree V8 and built a motor car to go with it. Built it to 1922. Like I said before, Henry Ford took it over because it went into receivership, and that's when Ford come out with this. Let's talk a little bit about this engine. So the engine, starting out with Cadillac, the V8 in 1912, the V12 in 1917, and then this engine in 1920 all have what's known as a fork and blade connecting rod. So basically, you have a fork rod that fits over a blade rod, and they run in tandem. I'm going to attempt to put a picture in a picture, probably up here somewhere, and show you what this actually looks like on the car. But in layman's terms, you have one rod that rides over the other rod. So they work in conjunction. Now there's a couple of theories of why they did this. One, on most V8s, you offset the rods. One's here, goes to both sides of the engine. Well, when you do that, you have to offset the block. Now the Liberty engine and this engine, the offset is very, very small. There's not much offset. So that's one advantage. Another advantage is when you're running two rods beside each other, when this one fires, you're putting stress on this side of the crank. And then when this one fires, you're putting stress on this side of the crank. So if you would look at the crankshaft spinning high revolutions, you would notice the crank's kind of doing this, waves. And that's what sets up on harmonics, and that's why modern cars have a harmonic balancer. This one does not have a harmonic balancer. It really doesn't need one, because with the blade, fork and blade, this piston is firing in the center of the crank, and this piston and rod is firing on the center of the crank. So you're not getting a flex in the crank. So that was another
design, brilliant design, by Henry Leland. And that's what this engine has. So I think I touched on this, I'm going to say it again. This is what's known as dual ignition. It is 2 4-cylinders running at the same time. You actually have 2 pistons firing at the same time. I'm going to say 1 and 4, and they're both firing, and it's 1, 4, 3, 2 on each side. And so you have 2 coils, 2 sets of points, a double rotor. The cap is split in half. One half runs this side, the other half runs the other side. And you actually have 2 4-cylinders running at the exact same time in tandem. And that's why this motor sounds so different than any other V8. You'll hear it with the exhaust and going down the road. But just a fascinating engine. I actually found another engine. A good friend of mine, Dave, thank you, is going to give me. And it's somewhat tore apart. I went up to try to film it. I thought I could show you these connecting rods, but it was far enough together that I couldn't see anything. So in a future video, we'll show you the breakdown of this engine. So let's move on to the rear end, and we'll show you that. All right, so I went down under. We're at the rear end. This thing is just massive. This is might as well be a 1-ton full floater rear axle. I mean, look at the size of this thing compared to my hand. So that's the rear axle. And the real neat thing about this rear axle, it is actually a full floating rear end. You can pull the axles out without taking the wheel off. You basically just take this hubcap off. There's a ring that comes off, and the axle will slide completely out, and the wheel's still on it. So it is a full floating rear axle. Let's go up and look at the transmission while we're underneath the car. So this is the underside of the motor. This is the oil pan, and we're going to come back looking at the transmission. All aluminum also. And you might notice this funky looking thing on the back end. That's the air pump. So this has an air pump or an air compressor to pump up your tires if you have a flat tire. And what you do is put the car in neutral. This kicks in. There's an air line that hooks up to it. And so that was kind of neat for back in the day. Made by the Kellogg manufacturing. Has a fully enclosed torque tube, no exposed drive shafts, and there you can see that rear axle again, massive. All right, I talked too much. Let's fire this thing up and go for a drive. Well, we'll take this thing for a little drive down the road. Two-wheel rear brakes, so you want to let the engine slow you down and kind of feather the brakes, downshift if you need to. if there was no cars coming, we would do a California stop. Bailing tonight. For you city folk, that would be, hey! Hey! On the road. A lot of times this place of the 4,600 pounds of weight and see if I can save this much gas by coasting up to the stop sign. So I think that'll do it for this segment. When we stop here, we'll switch over and show you some different angles going down the road. Well, there you go. There's another episode shot. Hope you enjoyed this one on the 23 Lincoln, the Lincoln that Henry Leland built, which Ford took over. So anyhow, had fun in shooting this one, and we'll see you the next time. Remember, drive them if you got them. We'll see ya. I don't know if I'm recording. How about that? Okay, try this again. So, yeah. Let's try this again, shall we? Oh my God.
Can't remember my own lines. Of course, I don't have any lines. Probably why I can't remember them.